Good Monday to you. It is October 10th. We are 28 days and 4 weeks out from the midterm elections. Good to be with you on this next edition of Beyond the Briefing. Lot to get to today. Midterms. Break those down a little. The latest on Russia and Ukraine. Kamala Harris, a little something there for you. And then PayPal getting in the news. I'm going to explain that. And then, of course, as always, on Mondays, we talk a little media. Let's get to the midterms. Just a quick heads up, if you will, a little PSA. The week before the midterms, I'm going to sit down in 2 episodes and go over one, the Senate map, walk through all of those races, and then the next one, do the House. This will give you everything you need to know about where the races stand and how I think folks are going to do and why. And so if you are following these things or have an interest in that, that's definitely something to mark your calendars for. Obviously, if you're subscribed to the podcast, then you don't need to worry about that. But spending a lot of time going through the data on each of these and talking to some of the key folks in these states. And so at that time, I think we'll have a pretty good sense of what the map looks like. So anyway, you'll sound like you really know what you're talking about as you talk to your friends and neighbors and coworkers going into to the election day, and also like cut through the media BS, because that's frankly what so much of it is. If you have any questions you want answered or races that you have specific questions on, if you go to @BeyondTheBriefing on Instagram, we have our own page there, and you could just DM any questions. You can always send emails to contact@SeanSpicer.com and just say, hey, can you mention this on the podcast on the House race or the Senate race or whatever. Interesting development last week. Trump's MAGA Inc. PAC. It's this new PAC that they stood up. It's a super PAC. They are spending big in a lot of these races. I'm talking, several $100,000 to back some of these candidates that President Trump pushed for in the primaries. That was something that a lot of donors, a lot of you, I was getting, emails and DMs from people saying, can you call President Trump and tell him to spend? And I think, look, people are looking at that war chest and say he's got $100 million. Why isn't he spending some on the folks that he wanted to bring over the finish line? And it's a good question. It's a fair question, because a lot of the solicitations, are talking about defending the agenda and promoting the agenda. And it's like, okay, well, you got these people that you want to run for definitely the Senate and a lot in the House. So, wouldn't you think that that you would spend? It's an interesting story, though. I will say, it's a little late. It's not that late. I mean, people are early voting in a lot of states already. I would like to have seen the spend earlier, and I think, but it's never too late, and he's in there early enough that he's, and so I would also wouldn't be surprised. Look, I think you've seen where he's going on these rallies. There's only so many battleground states, right? I guarantee he's going to be back in Pennsylvania. I wouldn't put North Carolina past anything. Georgia, there's no question that he's going to go back and defend Herschel. This is his guy. This is a tight race. Although I've said it before, I'll remind you again, that race is definitely going into a runoff. I just can't see any scenario where Herschel gets 50%. It's almost, impossible. The real interesting thing, and this is, I mentioned this on Thursday's podcast, if you listen to that at the end, but I think that there is a systematic undercounting of Republicans in these polls. It's something that even the pros are acknowledging that they're just not able to get. So keep an eye on that, because it's a problem, and so what that means is, if you see a race that's 47-44, and with the Democrat in the lead, and they're not technically accounting for, because they might say, oh, we got this many Republicans. Okay, but those aren't Trump Republicans, and those aren't, so you're not getting the right mix. And that's the whole idea of polling. It's a science. You're supposed to be able to take X amount of people, usually between 500 and 1,000, and you get a plus or minus of anywhere between 3.5 and 5, where, depending on how big the sample is, and you're basically trying to say, you can extrapolate it out and say, okay, based on that, because we have represented all of these different factions within that 1,000 people or whatever, that we can, say that the race stands at this. Well, if you're underrepresenting any group, then you're going to come out with a skewed result. And we're seeing this over and over again, cycle after cycle, this cycle in particular. So I think it's worth a field goal. And so my guess is that a lot of these races where the Republicans down 3, they win. Now it's not universal; it's not everyone but I will say this, and a lot of these because the momentum is shifting. Democrats peaked way too early with this abortion stuff, way too early. They got over their skis on it. Not only did they peak, they jumped the shark, to use a TV term, meaning they just started to talk about abortion on demand, and and it was like, whoa! I think people were like, pump the brakes. We didn't say we were with you all the way. We didn't necessarily agree with the court, but you guys now are going way too far, and I think that's what happened. They went too far. So you know, um, so anyway, I think that's something to keep an eye on. Also, not all polls are created equal. I've said this before. The public polling is horrendous. It just is. It's always the cheapest stuff. Um, they're asking, and a lot of times, check when you're reading a poll. If it's registered voters, it doesn't matter. Half of registered voters don't vote, so who cares what they? I mean, I hate to say it. If you're not voting, why do we care who you're supporting? Likely voters is what you really need to look at. But then within that, then there's this thing we call the screen, which is how are you determining what a likely voter is? That's the problem that pollsters have been really faced with, because what happened with Trump is he introduced a group of low propensity voters, people who didn't traditionally vote, suddenly started to vote again. So how do you define a likely voter? Because they might not have voted consistently pre 2016, but now they do. Huh. And we haven't been able to test that because we haven't had more than one other midterm. So this is going to be fascinating, because the media has been writing all these stories, and I think they're dead wrong. I think the crime stuff and the economic stuff is driving this. And we saw this over the weekend. Lee Zeldin had 2 gunshots that fell 30 feet from his house. His 2 16-year-old daughters were at the kitchen table. I talked to Lee about this over the weekend. And I mean, I can't imagine, as a father, thinking to yourself, you're out, he was at some Columbus Day parade or something with his wife, and the kids were at home doing homework at the kitchen table. You're got to be going through your head, oh my God, oh my God, oh my gosh. And then from a kid standpoint, you're sitting there thinking, I just was sitting at our kitchen table, and now I'm scared to be sitting at my kitchen table. This is what so many Americans are dealing with, a fear that they can't be safe in their own environment, their own neighborhood, their own city or town. And Democrats own this issue. They're the ones who want to defund the police. They're the ones who've been soft on crime. They're the ones who want drugs to everybody to be able to, and it's, I'm sorry, it's, this is them. This is their policies. This is what happens when you go soft on crime. And so the irony is, and I was talking to Lindsay Keith about this morning when we were doing an early show call. If Lee Zeldin hadn't been the person, if this was Joe Smith or Sally somebody, nobody would be talking about this. But because it's the Congressman Lee Zeldin, Republican gubernatorial candidate, it's getting some media attention. But think about how many Americans are facing or living in fear of the neighborhood that they live in or whatever, that no one's reporting on or caring about because they just don't have the stature or the title. That's a driving force in this issue, in this election. So is the economy. Inflation, wages, rising interest rates. At the end of the day, I've said this over and over again, people vote for 2 primal reasons: economic security and personal security. Those can manifest themselves in very different ways because it's not about a number. People always throw out these stats and say, like, oh, but crime is down. It doesn't matter what the statistics say. If you don't feel like you can walk down your street safely during the day, even in the early evening order, it doesn't matter what the statistics say. If you don't feel safe, it doesn't matter. Same thing on the economic side. If you are worried that you're going to lose your job or that you're not saving enough or that you don't have enough saved or whatever, you can run out as many government statistics as you want. And that's the problem. It's the Biden administration's falling in this trap. Well, we've created all these jobs. No one cares. They don't feel it. They don't see it. They know that their interest rates are going up and that they're going to get worse, by the way. They know that, and by the way, the Fed policy, we talk about this on the show. People have to understand the reason the Fed is driving up interest rates. That's one part of the equation. The other part is they want the job market to bottom out. They need layoffs. That's part of the strategy here. And none of that bodes well politically if you're the party in power. Anyway, by the way, we'll get to this a little later. I mentioned Russia and Ukraine. This Biden Armageddon comment last week, in case you haven't heard about it, he's at a fundraiser for the DSCC. This is the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. They raise money for just the folks, the wing of the Democratic Party that raises money for Senate candidates. And he's up there at the home of James Murdoch and his wife, who are clearly not on the team. They are the not on the normal side that Rupert and Lachlan are on. And Biden starts telling people that, prepare for basically Armageddon, that Putin's ready to use nukes, da 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 da. Well, I mean, what do you think that could? I mean, so twofold. One, can you imagine if Trump said this? They'd be like, he's leaking intelligence. Number two, he's scaring people. And then the White House is out there doing damage control. It's like, oh, he wasn't. This wasn't about new intel. It was like his personal opinion. Oh my God! Like, so make up your mind. Well, so it's either really sloppy, but it was something. But anyway, I will say this. I do think that Putin's like a caged tiger to some degree. Like, I worry about him. I don't know that I'd go the Biden route here, but this is worrisome. You got a guy that doesn't care, and he's got nuclear weapons, and he's willing to create and say to his people anything. There's that bridge attack that cut off Russia to Crimea. Very symbolic. Ukrainians celebrating it. So I don't know if they had anything to do with it, but they definitely applauded it because it's very symbolic. And, this whole thing is just fascinating because I think at the beginning of this, you could ask any military strategist historian, they would have assumed that Ukraine would have folded within like 7 to 10 days, maybe a little longer. But man, Ukraine, those folks, they are strong people. And Russia is just not, it's flailing. And it's a fascinating thing to watch because it really it's a testament to the will of those people that they know that this is up to them. They're getting billions of dollars in arms and support, but not boots on the ground. These are their people fighting for their homeland. And man, it is awe inspiring just to watch these people. And after what these Russians have done to the death and destruction, it's grotesque. Anyway, moving on. I do want to talk a little bit about Kamala Harris. She's going to Texas to meet with big donors. Okay, no shock there. A lot of money down there in Texas. But it's amazing. I cannot believe how she continues to go with not going to the border. How do you do that? I mean, it's like you're literally walking by it. And as I've said before, I sound like a broken record sometimes. I mean, when you have a complicit media, that's how. I mean, how do you go to Texas over and over again? How do you go to the DMZ and you have time to go survey the border of North and South Korea, but you don't have time when you're in Texas to visit the southern border? You don't have time to call back the presidents of the country, the quote root causes. What the heck is going on? This is crazy. It's just it tells you everything that you need to know. It's like when Biden yelled at, "Oh, where's Jackie?" the other day, and like the media was like, yes, I will say this, they did cover it, quote unquote, but that was like the bare minimum. We talked about this, but there was like this media research center analysis that showed when Trump couldn't walk down a handrail after a speech that was like wet and he's in like leather-soled shoes, that it got like 51 minutes of play on like CNN and MSNBC or something like that. I mean, I can't remember the exact stat. And this thing gets nothing. Hey, he's calling out for a dead woman. Unreal. For those of you who use PayPal, moving on to story number 4 here. These guys announced last week a $2,500 fine for users who promote misinformation. Okay, think about this. PayPal is a service where you transfer money. So what, are they going to start monitoring what you say online? I'm like, I didn't really completely understand how they were going to to do this. Well, apparently neither did they because they've already walked this thing back. But just stop for a moment and realize what's happening here. These guys were literally, I mean, who was going to be the ref? Who is going to decide what misinformation is? I mean, is it because we've seen with so many things, the Steele dossier, some of the COVID stuff, that it's like what's quote what the mainstream media tells us today doesn't happen to be the truth tomorrow. So I don't need some Silicon Valley tech exec deciding what misinformation is, because guess what? It always goes in one direction. And it's funny because they weren't just going to block your account; they were going to take your money, $2,500. I mean, I can't believe I'm thinking in my head about the meeting, and they're all sitting in a boardroom, and like Needlebaum raises his hand and says, "Hey, what if we start like?" I just don't even understand. Like, you don't have the bandwidth or the infrastructure to monitor this, to handle this. I mean, this was like a massive lawsuit. But here's the thing: this just makes you realize that this is like the stuff with GoFundMe and all these woke companies that change the rules as they go because they have a massively left-wing agenda. They're walking it back. They're not going to do it. Well, of course not, because enough people, I think, pointed out how ridiculous this was. So good on them. Every week we always talk about the media. Lots to get to. One, Biden made this big announcement that he was pardoning everyone who had been convicted of a marijuana offense. And the late night crowd went nuts. They all loved it. It was so great. Everyone in the media was. So here's the reality, though. Regardless of whether you come down on the issue or not, it was a stunt. That's it. Plain and simple. 30 days before an election to get young voters out. Okay. It doesn't matter. There isn't one person in jail because of this. So this is like, I mean, you literally have to be high to think this matters. And it's also sending a really stupid message, I think. At a time when fentanyl's coming over the border, we're like trying to figure out which drugs are okay to do. This is what the priorities of this government are. They don't secure the border, but they can pardon everyone for a marijuana offense. What? And by the way, here's the thing this is why it's such a mixed message. Smoking pot he's pardoning all those people. It's still a classified drug. Number one. Number two is if you smoke it and you get arrested for it, it still goes on your record. Right? Why does that happen? Okay, why does that matter? Well, let's say that you want to go into anything that requires security clearance and you have to fill out an SF-86. You have to admit whether you've done marijuana in the last 7 years. It's still a classified drug. So Biden is on the one hand sending a signal, I'm going to pardon all you guys. On the other hand, there are people in his own White House that can't serve because they smoked pot. So what are you telling the youth of America? Anyway, it was crazy. And everyone in the media sucked it up because, of course, they think it's cool. It was such a blatant play for young voters. And anyway, Stacey Abrams, moving over to another little fun one, was on Fox News Sunday. She gets asked by Shannon Bream over and over again about being an election denier, because that's the big thing, but only with Republicans. You never ask, you never ask Dems. But Shannon Bream, because she's good at what she does, asked her. And she starts saying, she plays the clip. Shannon Bream plays the clip where Stacey Abrams says, "We won." And Stacey Abrams launches into a diatribe that says, no, what I'm talking about is like, we won the issues. We won the philosophical. No, you did what? Are you kidding me? Like, this is insane. She's going off about how, like, she wasn't referring to, like, winning. She, the other winning, where you don't win, but you win. I mean, it was like she had borrowed, like, Kamala Harris's speechwriter. So could you write one of those word salad things for me, please? Unbelievable. And no one, no one really thought that that was that big of an issue. And I mean, I think it's going to get a little bit of play. Obviously, we'll cover it on Spice and Company. Um, so, you know, that to me is fascinating. Um, so just know that that's the difference. Like the left gets away with this kind of stuff. Um, so anyway, I just want to note that in on the issue of abortion, it has continued to come up. It's amazing though. So Katie Hobbs, who is the Democratic gubernatorial nominee in Arizona, was on Face the Nation. She gets asked about limits on abortion, and she says, "No, there shouldn't be any." So again, here you have a major candidate saying that there shouldn't be any abortion, any limits on abortion up to the time of birth. Don't you think that? I mean, that's the extreme position. That's the, that's it. And yet, you know, they get no pushback. It's like, okay, move on. Um, Terry Lake, her opponent, did sort of make a big deal out of it, which talking about kind of pressing it, making the point later on the show, and making that point that how crazy that is. So at least Carrie Lake got her licks in there. Over on CNN, Jake Tapper was having this little roundtable discussion about Georgia. And Scott Jennings, who is a Republican strategist, brought up the fact that Raphael Warnock equally has problems. He's in a custody fight. His wife accuses him of running her over. I mean, like, this is like serious stuff, right? Of course, you don't hear any of the Raphael Warnock stuff, right? And Tapper gets in the middle of the conversation and says it's not the same. Which I don't think Scott Jennings was trying to make this equivalency point. He was just saying, hey, look, he's got issues too. But this is like Andrea Mitchell a couple weeks ago trying to get in that middle that interview with Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor candidate in Wisconsin, where she said, and I know that you don't want to defend the police, but, and it's like, nope, actually CNN has come out with an investigation that says that Mandela Barnes does want to defund the police and has said that stuff. But these reporters, quote unquote, these journalists, quote unquote, continue to jump in to defend the left in the middle of these shows. It's unbelievable. I was watching NBC, and as I told you guys before, I watch the shows so you don't have to. But it's kind of like an addiction. So I'm watching Meet the Press. I DVR them all, and then I'll work out and I'll sort of go through them all. So Kristen Welker was sitting in for Chuck Todd, and she interviews Don Bacon, who's the congressman from Nebraska, or a congressman from Nebraska. Don Bacon has voted for impeachment. He voted to certify the January 6th committee. I mean, this is not a MAGA Republican dude. I have never seen, and all she starts off the interview with him, are you supporting Herschel Walker? I'm like, he's from Nebraska. Herschel's running in Georgia. And she continues to press it, and it was the most aggressive, interruptive. He would start, and she'd say, but Congressman. It was, I actually was just like, this is a bad interview. I, as a viewer, am not able to hear what he thinks, or I'm not getting anything out of this because you're being such a bad host. It was a horrible interview, and it was literally like she was seething. I've never seen such a bad interview in my entire life. It's just funny. And then she immediately has Alyssa Slotkin on from Michigan, a congresswoman there who's in a Trump district, and it was sort of like, "Hi, patty cake, patty cake." The way that and it's, I don't know that whether they're auditioning to try to show how tough they are. I don't know, but it was fascinating to watch this thing. Anyway, as I mentioned to you before, one other little thing to keep an eye on these closing days. Every Democrat is Democrat, congressman, Democrat candidate. The Republicans are far right MAGA candidate. They literally, there's no difference. It's a fascinating thing. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you for subscribing and sharing. And anyway, I look forward to a great conversation on Thursday. I hope you'll enjoy it, and talk to you soon.